The snow had been falling since before sunset, thick and relentless, the kind that erased fences, swallowed roads, and made every sound feel distant and unreal. He hadn't planned to be out so late, but one of the outer fence posts along the property line had been loose for days, and winter didn't wait for convenience. By the time he finished tying it down, darkness had settled heavy over the land, and the wind had sharpened into something that bit straight through wool and leather. He mounted his horse and turned back toward home, following the narrow trail that ran past his neighbor's place. Or what used to be his neighbor's place. The small cabin ahead stood dark and hollow now, its chimney cold for weeks. The man who'd lived there, quiet, sickly, and mostly forgotten, had died not long ago. Folks said he'd sent for a mail-order bride just before his health failed, some last hope of not dying alone. The rancher remembered shaking his head when he'd heard it, thinking the timing was cruel. As he passed the cabin, something caught his eye near the fence line. A shape, too small to be a drift, too still to be livestock. He pulled his horse to a stop. For a moment, he told himself it was nothing. Snow played tricks on the eyes. But the longer he stared, the more his chest tightened. He swung down from the saddle, boots sinking deep with every step as he moved closer, the wind roaring in his ears. Then he saw her. A woman lay crumpled against the fence, half buried in snow, her dark hair plastered to her face with ice. A thin coat barely covered her shoulders, no match for the storm. One gloveless hand clutched a small, battered suitcase like it was the only thing tethering her to the world. Her lips were blue, her eyes fluttered weakly when his shadow fell over her. "Oh no," he breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. She tried to speak, but the sound was lost to the wind. Her fingers twitched, stiff and trembling, as if even that small movement cost her everything. When he touched her arm, the cold shocked him, it felt like touching frozen stone. "You're freezing," he said, voice tight, though he knew she couldn't answer properly. He shrugged off his coat without thinking and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling her closer. She shook her head faintly, panic flashing through her eyes. "No, please," she whispered, the words barely there. I don't want trouble." That was when it hit him. The suitcase, the cabin, the timing. "You're the bride," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Aren't you?" Her eyes filled with tears that froze almost as soon as they fell. She gave the smallest nod. Anger burned hot in his chest, cutting through the cold. Whoever had turned her away, family, neighbors, anyone who'd known better, had left her here to die. He didn't hesitate again. Sliding one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back, he lifted her up. She was frighteningly light, like the storm had already begun to claim her. She whimpered softly, clutching at his shirt. "I can walk," she lied. "No, you can't," he said firmly. "And you're not staying here." He carried her toward his horse, snow lashing at his face, the wind howling as if angry at his defiance. The cabin behind them disappeared into the white, silent and accusing. Carefully, he settled her against his chest, mounted, and turned toward his own ranch, pushing the horse forward through the drifts. Behind them, the storm closed in, erasing their tracks as if she had never been there at all. By the time the cabin came into view, the rancher could barely feel his fingers. The ride had been slow and careful, his body curved protectively around her as the wind tried to pry them apart. Her breathing was shallow against his chest, each exhale faint and uneven, and fear gnawed at him with every step the horse took. He had seen frostbite before. He had seen men lose fingers, toes, entire lives to winters like this. He prayed silently that he hadn't found her too late. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, the sudden warmth of the cabin almost painful against his frozen skin. The fire he'd banked earlier still glowed low, red embers breathing softly. He set her down on the couch with care, as if she might shatter, then moved fast, muscle memory taking over where thought failed him. He stoked the fire, the flames leaping eagerly, then stripped off his wet coat and her soaked outer layers, replacing them with dry blankets stacked thick from the chest down. Her eyes fluttered open as the heat reached her. Panic surged across her face, and she tried to sit up, only to gasp and fall back. "No," she whispered, voice hoarse. "I can't stay. I'll leave. I promise." "You're not going anywhere," he said gently but firmly. He crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. "Not tonight. Not in this storm." She searched his face like she was waiting for the catch, the condition that kindness always came with. When none came, her shoulders shook, and a quiet sob escaped her before she could stop it. He turned away to give her a moment, setting the kettle on the stove, his jaw tight. When he returned, he helped her sip warm broth, holding the cup steady when her hands trembled too badly. Color began to creep back into her cheeks, slow but hopeful. She kept apologizing between sips. Sorry for the mess, sorry for being trouble, sorry for existing in a place she clearly felt unwelcome. Each apology tightened something in his chest. "You don't owe me anything," he said finally. "You didn't do this to yourself." That seemed to break something open in her. Words spilled out, halting at first, then faster, as if she feared she'd lose courage if she stopped. She told him about the letter she'd received months ago, the careful handwriting promising safety, marriage, a fresh start. She told him about the long journey, the cold stations, the stairs, the hope she'd carried like a fragile thing. And then she told him about arriving to find a dying man in a bed, barely able to speak her name. "He was kind," she said softly. "But he was already gone. I buried him before I even learned the land. The neighbor's family had come quickly after the funeral," she said. "They'd taken what they wanted, spoken around her like she wasn't there. One of them told her flatly that she had no claim, no place. The cabin wasn't hers. The land wasn't hers. She could leave, or she could freeze, it made no difference to them." As she spoke, the rancher's hands curled into fists at his sides. He'd known his neighbor was sick. He hadn't known the rest. Shame pricked at him for not asking sooner, for not looking closer. When her voice finally faded, exhaustion overtook her. She slumped back against the pillows, eyes heavy. He adjusted the blankets, then pulled a chair close and sat, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something fragile and new was taking shape. Long after she slept, he remained there, staring into the fire, realizing that saving her life was only the beginning. Morning came slowly, as if the world itself was unsure whether it should wake after a night like that. Pale light crept through the frost-laced windows, turning the snow outside into a vast, blinding sheet. The storm had passed, leaving behind an unnatural quiet. He rose before the sun was fully up, stoked the fire again, and set about making breakfast, careful not to wake her. The steady, ordinary motions, cracking eggs, slicing bread, heating water, felt grounding after the chaos of the night. When she finally stirred, she sat up. Cautiously, blinking as though unsure where she was. Fear crossed her face for a heartbeat, then softened as memory returned. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and watched him move about the kitchen. "Good morning," he said gently, turning with a mug of coffee in hand. "How are you feeling?" "Warmer," she answered after a pause. Her voice was still weak, but there was strength in it now. "Alive," he smiled faintly at that and set the mug down within her reach. She wrapped her hands around it, breathing in the steam, like warmth itself was something she didn't fully trust yet. They ate in near silence at first, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. Then she spoke, her gaze fixed on the table. "I should go today. I don't want to impose. You've already done more than enough." He shook his head before she could finish. "The roads are still buried. And even if they weren't, you don't have anywhere to go." The truth of it seemed to land hard. She swallowed, nodding once. "I'll find work somewhere. I don't expect to stay." Something in her words, so practiced, so resigned, made his chest ache. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face in the clear morning light. The fear was still there, but beneath it was resilience, quiet and stubborn. "You can stay," he said simply. "Not just until the snow melts. Until you figure things out." She looked up sharply, eyes wide. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Why was harder to answer than he expected. He could have said because it was right, or because no one else would. But the real answer lived somewhere deeper. "Because leaving you in that snow would have haunted me for the rest of my life," he said at last. "And because this place is too quiet." Her breath hitched, and she looked away, pressing a hand to her mouth. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. "I was so afraid of this land. Of men like you. I thought kindness would come with a price." He stood and crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. "If you ever feel unsafe here, you tell me. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not loyalty, nothing." She nodded, tears spilling freely now, not from fear but relief. Outside, the sun climbed higher, setting the snow ablaze with light. The world looked untouched, as if offering them a clean slate. Later, they stepped onto the porch together. The cold was gentler now, the air sharp but bearable. She breathed deeply, shoulders relaxing as she took in the wide, open land stretching in every direction. "I think," she said quietly, "I'd like to try staying." He nodded, a slow, certain motion. "Then you'll stay." They stood side by side, watching the light move across the fields. What shocked him wasn't that he'd saved her life. It was the realization that in doing so, she had unknowingly saved him from a loneliness he'd long mistaken for peace.